If you're a bear in North America, food is never far from your mind. If you're a brown bear or a black bear, summer and fall are seasons of work when food is available and you have a goal of getting fat. If you're a polar bear in Western Hudson Bay, winter and spring are your seasons of plenty when sea ice give you a platform to hunt. This past summer on Explore.org, we watched brown bears at Brooks River in Katmai National Park work all summer to get fat before winter hibernation. In the Tongass National Forest of Southeast Alaska, we saw black bears take advantage of a bountiful run of pink salmon. Now, as black and brown bears prepare for winter hibernation, polar bears wait on the shore of Hudson Bay for the return of sea ice. These species have much in common, but they each use specialized adaptations to survive in a wide variety of ecosystems. Their lifestyles also raise questions about their future in an era of human-driven climate change. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm the resident naturalist with Explore.org. And today we're going to talk about all three North American bear species and to explore their lives, especially the bears that we get to see on our webcams on Explore.org in either in Katmai National Park or Ann Creek in the Tongass National Forest, or polar bears in Hudson Bay near Churchill, Manitoba. I'm joined by my two co-hosts. First, let's talk to Jennifer Kardiak, the manager of Ann Wildlife Observatory in the Tongass National Forest. Jen, it's so great to speak with you. I really enjoyed the black bear cams this summer, so thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. We love being part of Explore.org now.
And our other co-host, for those of you who watch the polar bear cams, you're familiar with her. Our other co-host is Alysa McCall, who is the Director of Conservation Outreach and a staff scientist with Polar Bears International. So Alysa, thanks for being here once again. I think this will be a fun talk because we've talked about brown and polar bears before, but we haven't brought in the black bear side of things. So we have a triple threat to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's so nice to be here and nice to include the black bears in this as well. Apologies if my camera's a little shaky. We are out on the tundra buggy today, which you can see behind me, and winds are howling. So we're rocking back and forth.
It's almost never a calm day out on the tundra. So comes with the territory, I guess. And if you were watching, no matter where you happen to be watching from right now, maybe if that's on Facebook Live or if you're watching on YouTube or on Explore.org, if you have questions for us about bears in North America, please drop those in the chats. We'll do our best to try to answer a few of those during the broadcast today. You know, we're most familiar with certain bear populations in North America, but we'll do our best to try to answer bear questions about bears, maybe continent-wide if we can. And we hope to answer definitively the question, which bear is the best bear? So maybe you can make that decision at the end of the broadcast today. Let's begin maybe by introducing the respective habitats that the bears that we know on Explore.org or that we study most often. Jen, the webcams at Ann Creek are the most recent addition to the bear lineup on Explore.org. So tell us a little bit more about Ann Creek. Where is it and how would you describe its bear habitat?
Great. So Ann Creek is in Southeast Alaska. It's part of the Tongass National Forest, which is the U.S.'s largest national forest at almost 17 million acres. And Ann, within that, is home to one of the largest runs of pink salmon in Southeast Alaska. Some 100,000 to 300,000 pink salmon run up there each year. And that supports the high density of black and brown bears. It's one of the few places in the world where you can see both brown and black bears feeding in the same stream. So it's pretty special in that way. And it's a temperate rainforest, so it's very moist all the time.
It certainly looks like it on the cam. I mean, it just looks damp and mossy everywhere, which I kind of love. I mean, on a hot summer day, like if you're somewhere where it hasn't been raining for a while, you look at that and you just kind of look refreshed by viewing that landscape.
Yeah, and I think the moss adds like a magical quality to it. Like it just feels really special when you're walking in that forest.
It's a very different habitat than what we'll introduce next with Alysa. Although it's not that much further south in latitude than where Alysa is right now. So Alysa, let's talk about the habitat for polar bears. It's vastly different than the Tongass National Forest, even though, a lot of these bears are living roughly at the same latitude.
Right. Great point, Mike. And I will say, where we are right now, so we're just outside of Churchill, Manitoba. We're on the coast of Hudson Bay up in Canada here. And we are kind of amongst some of the most southern polar bears in the world. So these polar bears here, these Churchill polar bears, right now at this time of the year, they are on land because in the summer, if the sea ice melts, we don't have year-round sea ice here. The bears are forced on land throughout the summer and early fall. But that means we know where we're going to see them and when. And as we're starting to head into winter, the temperatures are cooling down. The bears are gathering along the coast, waiting for that ice to come back because they are ready to go hunt their main prey, seals, which we'll talk more about. But as soon as there is ice on the bay, as soon as it freezes overnight, most of the bears are pretty much gone. It happens in the blink of an eye. They want to be out there on Arctic sea ice. And many polar bears across the Arctic might spend their entire lives on Arctic sea ice and never even see land. So polar bears are an ice bear, which is very different from the other bears. And they are a marine bear. So they're very tied to the ocean, which we think is pretty neat. Even though at this time of the year we're seeing them on land, this is not quite their standard. But it's fun.
And it's also quite different from the bears that I'm most familiar with in Katmai National Park in southwest Alaska. Katmai has plenty of tundra and glaciers at high elevations, but the region really itself experiences relatively temperate environment due to the moderating effects from the nearby Pacific Ocean to the east and south, and then the Bering Sea to the west. So brown bears, they're found everywhere in the park between the barren areas of between volcanic summits, even and down to the intertidal zone. And the landscape is also rich with an interconnected system of rivers and lakes. So this creates perfect habitat for sockeye salmon. In Katmai, especially the central portion of the national park where Brooks River is located, salmon are the most abundant, high-calorie food for brown bears, and this allows bears in Katmai to live at very high densities. More than 80 individual bears have been identified along the 3-kilometer-long Brooks River in summer per year over the last 20 years. So that's just an average. Every year, and it can go up and down, but this summer, park rangers identified more than 90 individual bears using the river throughout the summer. So the places that my co-hosts and I just introduced offer only a glimpse of the habitats that North America's bears inhabit. If you looked at brown bears in Katmai as the only example of brown bears, you might be led to assume that all brown bears need salmon to survive, when that's not necessarily the case. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the broader habitats of these different bear species. I'll start first just because we're on the subject of brown bears. Brown bears, they occupy diverse terrestrial habitats. Prior to European colonization in North America, brown bears lived everywhere from the Arctic tundra on the north slopes of Alaska and Canada down to the mid-continental prairies, to the deserts of what we now call the Southwest U.S. and northern Mexico, and of course, all the way to the coast of California. And when we consider where brown bears make a living, then we find that they are really not highly specialized for living in any one particular habitat. In general, though, they are found more often in less forested habitats compared to black bears. So think prairies and tundra, for example. But Jen, black bears, they utilize a wide variety of habitats too. They're the continent's most widely dispersed bear, from Florida up into northern Canada and Alaska. Although when we examine the places where black bears are found most often, there seems to be maybe one common denominator.
Yeah, it's usually forested habitats. That's how they evolved, but they now range all the way down into Mexico. So they're in the swamps of Florida and Louisiana. They've gone back into Arkansas. They're in the deserts of the Southwest. They're just super adaptable, and they're actually expanding their ranges in many different areas. So it's pretty impressive for a larger carnivore to be expanding their ranges, because most of the time we're shrinking their ranges. But they can live near humans a little bit easier, although they do cause trouble. And so we don't like them to get into our foods. That happens a lot. But when people are good about their garbage, then it's better for the bears. And then narrowing in with the Tongass National Forest also has a lot of different habitats. And the black bears in that area are throughout the Tongass, except for 3 of the large islands, the ABC Islands of Admiralty, Baranof, and Chichagof. Those have a very dense brown bear population, so there's no black bears on there. And then Annan, the habitat there is, like I said, temperate rainforest. There's a lot of spruce and hemlock trees and many understory plants with devil's club, berry bushes, and skunk cabbage that they feed on. And then, of course, salmon is our favorite.
Well, it's easy to understand that salmon are such a high-calorie food source for them. And I want to talk about, of course, the diet of these individuals in a few minutes. In contrast, though, Alysa, we talked about our brown and black bears, and they're sort of like habitat, almost like habitat generalists in a sense. I think we can consider, and this will maybe be a recurring topic throughout our program today. I think we can consider polar bears to be specialists in many ways, especially for their habitat that they prefer.
Absolutely. Yeah, polar bears, we do consider them an ice specialist. They are just highly adapted, highly evolved for this Arctic sea ice habitat and region. We see them only across the circumpolar north. They don't live in the south hemisphere, of course. They're also not right at the North Pole because there's not a lot of food there. And I know we'll talk about diet in a minute, but we know polar bears from here, they can stay on land for several months, but we also know they do have a limit. They don't have the same access to calories on land that they do on the sea ice. So after about 6 months, we know that polar bears would really start to not do well across the population if they were stuck on land. They really do need to be out on that Arctic sea ice. That's how they make their living. That's where they have all these adaptations to be. And yeah, they really, they're just the marine bear, ice bear, biggest bear. They're quite special and specialized.
Speaking of size, we did get an audience question about that, actually. And I didn't have that prepped in my outline specifically to talk about the sizes of our individual bears that, where maybe we're talking about in the Tongass National Forest or polar bears in general or brown bears and katmais. So somebody wrote in and asked, what are the size differences between these bears and katmai bears? And maybe they think they're thinking, specifically perhaps about polar bears and then also about black bears. I'll say, first of all, that, when you're watching brown bears and katmai, they are some of the largest brown bears in the world. The biggest adult males there are pushing 1,300, 1,400 pounds in the fall. That's our best estimate, kind of like right now. So really, really big bears. And they average in midsummer 700 to 900 pounds for adult males. So really big individuals. Alysa, though, I'll ask you this question next. I'll throw it to you, and then we'll go to Jen to talk about black bears and the Tongass. But how do the polar bears overall compare in size to maybe very large brown bears?
Right. Yeah. For katmai brown bears, they're not too far off, as you said. Katmai having some of the biggest brown bears. So adult males also 1,300 to 1,500 pounds or so, but they can get bigger depending on how much food they're eating. The largest adult male we know of that was ever captured was in Alaska, and he hit 2,200 pounds or so. Polar bears are also very dimorphic, so 2 sizes. Females are half or less than half the size of males, so there's quite a size difference between them.
And Jen, what about the black bears in the Tongass National Forest? When we're watching the webcams, it's really difficult just to get a sense of scale on how big they are.
Yeah. They range from 200 to about 500 pounds. So they're smaller than the brown bears. And our brown bears are smaller than your brown bears as well. And there is a big difference between the females and males of the black bears. Once females start reproducing, they put more energy into that than they do growing in size. But around 200 to 400. So they're big, but they're not as big, definitely, as brown bears.
Here, I think maybe they make up for it in their cleverness. Yes. When you read about black bears, you're like, holy crap, these animals are really smart.
Yeah.
Wide ranges in size, wide range in their habitats that they like to utilize. But how might they specialize to survive in these different environments? Recall that an adaptation is a behavior or a trait that makes an organism better suited for its environment. So no matter if we see black, brown or polar bears, we can recognize them as a bear, right? Yet each species displays considerable differences that allow them to survive in the particular challenges of their environment. So let's take a few moments to discuss some of the characteristics that define North America's bear species, starting with their appearance. And if we're just thinking about brown bears at first, for example, they're aptly named. Their fur is often plain brown, but it often ranges from blonde to dark brown. And while it provides warmth and certainly some camouflage, brown bear fur really isn't specialized for any particular habitat, perhaps because brown bears live in such a wide variety of habitats. But Jen, it's different with black bears. I mean, they're aptly named as well for their black fur, which most black bears tend to have, but they have maybe the greatest variation of fur color of any bear species.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of a shame that they're named black bears because it confuses so many people because there is such a range. And when you take the whole of all black bears, they actually are less often black, just because now they've spread into so many different areas. So they go anywhere from black to cinnamon to blonde to the white of the spirit bear. And then there's an almost blue silver one that's an even rarer glacier bear. And they think that the black fur is more suited to forested areas and the shadows of forests. And so in areas of the West where they're in more open areas, they tend to be a little bit lighter, although you'll still have different colors in both areas. And then they think the spirit bear, the white, is made for fishing so that when the fish look up, they don't see the shadow of a black bear. They see white reflected, so they're not going to run away as much. Black bears also have usually a chest patch. It's a white shape on their chest, which is great for us with identification if we can see them. It's not technically adaptive for any other thing, but it's helpful for us in IDing them. And throughout the season, they also have big changes. They'll be like brown and have almost like dreadlocks as they're shedding out. And then as they start eating more fish, they get glossy and black. And so if we go away for like 5 days and come back, we're like, who is that? Because they've changed so drastically. And then we have a few bears that have like black heads, but brown bodies. So people think that they're hybrids, but it's just, they have a flair for the dramatic in their fur coloring. They just have a bunch of different fur colors.
Yeah, it's amazing to see. And I hadn't considered some of those thoughts about why they may have those wide variety of fur colors. So that's really fascinating. And in contrast to those, I think, again, Alysa, we can look at polar bears and see that they are, again, they're specialized. They maybe have the least variety of fur color, although it changes due to the light of the day, but it's pretty pale.
Absolutely. Yeah, they really don't have much variety there. For them, it's, again, all about that sea ice. Like you said, they can kind of change depending on the light. And at this time of the year, after they've been on land for a little while, they can look a little muddy or almost kind of oily and creamy rather than white. But as soon as that ice comes in, they'll have a good snow bath and rub off. But the one thing about their fur that's really interesting to us is that it's transparent. It's clear. So it actually just looks white to our eyes. And the way it scatters light makes it have that appearance that it's white. It also is hollow, and it helps trap warm air against the polar bear's body, keeping them nice and warm. They've got two very thick layers of fur. I'm not sure about the other bears, but for polar bears, they've got, black skin, and then a very thick, dense layer of underfur, like a sweater, and then a layer of longer fur over top, almost like a raincoat. So multiple layers to keep them warm and camouflaged on that Arctic sea ice.
I know that brown bears have black skin because we can see that when they're shedding. I don't know about black bears, though. Jen, do they have dark skin too?
I don't know if they all do, but definitely we've seen when they've shed it out, it's black underneath. Sometimes I don't like to make definitive sentences about some of the bears because then you'll get a bear that's completely different. But in general, it does look like they have black skin underneath when they rub off on things. Yeah,
that's a good point. There is no average bear. So every one of them is special in their own ways, not only in their behaviors, but also their appearances as well. And one of the ways that we can contrast these different species as well is by looking at their claws too. The color and structure of polar bear fur, really specialized. The claw shape of brown and black bears and polar bears is also quite specialized when we get to the nitty-gritty details of them. Because when we examine, these species in other ways, we find that all three possess adaptations suited to their particular lifestyles. And with brown bear claws, one way that that's a way that we can clearly see that they're adapted to living in a variety of places. Although brown bears can climb trees, their claws really aren't well suited for climbing. Their front claws are adapted for a different purpose. They are several inches long, and they act as excavators. This helps them to dig tubers and roots, underground truffles, ground squirrels, bees' nests, even clams, which is a foraging behavior of bears that live on the Pacific coast of Alaska, and especially on the Pacific side of Katmai. So brown bear claws are an all-purpose tool for getting at foods that reside under the surface of the soil. Jen, if brown bear claws are digging tools, and how do you describe black bear claws, and what does their size and shape tell us about their lifestyle?
Yeah, black bear claws are for climbing. So they're shorter, sharper, and more curved so that when they can grip the tree bark, they can go higher and quicker. They were evolved in forested areas, and they are natural tree climbers. They do dig as well, but not as extensively or as deeply as bears do. But they do still excavate some decayed logs and dig for roots. But it was made for tree climbing. That's where they find safety. They find food up there, like catkins, acorns, and apples. They'll climb up there. They'll climb up there just to take a nap. But mostly it's for safety as well, for the cubs especially.
And anytime I've seen a brown bear in a tree, like a young one, for example, besides like a first-year cub, anytime I've seen a brown bear in a tree, they just look like they're uncomfortable there. But when you see a black bear in a tree, Jen, it is like the black bears they are just so comfortable in those trees. It's amazing how strong they are to climb trees, but also, those claws are just so especially adapted for that use.
Yeah, and sometimes it's amazing that they don't fall out, because they'll move around in ways that seem like they're about to fall off the tree limb that they're in, but they're not. That they're just really adapted to living in trees.
And now, Alysa, to get back to polar bears, when I was in Churchill a few years ago, one of the things that amazed me about the bears was the size of polar bear feet and the shape of their claws. Mm-hmm. So how do polar bear claws differ from brown and black bear claws? And what does this say about their ability to make a living on sea ice?
Right. Well, I have never seen a polar bear in a tree, and there's hardly any trees around here for them to even try. So yeah, they definitely have ice claws, I guess you'd call them. So you're right, Mike, massive feet. Just before this broadcast started, we had a couple males right outside the window, and I was asking my colleagues here, please zoom in on the feet with your photos, because they're just huge. You can see they have fur over them. They really are built-in snowshoe snow boots. They're kind of sticky. They have some traction on the ice like a boot. Big like a snowshoe to distribute that weight across the ice so they can be so heavy but not fall through. And then those claws are very short, well, relatively short, very thick and very sharp. And those are for grabbing slippery seals out from under the water and hauling them up. So these are, compared to those brown bear claws that are great for digging, these claws on the right here, these are for killing seals, and they are very effective.
Really is it's just like they have like 5 ice picks right in front of their feet. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we can see in their habitat preferences, their fur color, their claws, all of these are parts of the adaptive mosaic of each bear species. And diet is another clue which we can use to understand how these bears are making a living and why they live where they are. Brown bears, for example, all bears actually are classified in the order Carnivora. So that's the same group of mammals that includes canines, felines, raccoons, seals, weasels. And it seems to make intuitive sense that bears are considered taxonomic carnivores because they have big teeth. And except for, giant pandas, they'll eat a lot of meat when given the chance. But classification isn't based on diet. Rather, it's really just based on a shared evolutionary history. So just because you are a carnivore in that order, that doesn't mean you have to eat meat or you're living the lifestyle of like a pure carnivore, like a lynx or a lion or something like that. So one of the most notable differences between North America's bears is diet. Brown bears, they live as generalist omnivores. They're like humans in that sense. They'll eat and can survive on a great diversity of foods. In fact, most brown bear populations in North America, in Asia, and in Europe are largely vegetarian. In the northern Rocky Mountains, for example, the yearly diet of many grizzly bears is more than 90% plants. So cat-sized bears are a bit of an exception when we see them on the webcams because they're foraging on a lot of meat, particularly salmon. But they don't shun plants either. They eat a lot of grass, a lot of sedge, herbaceous plants, and berries. So they're also slightly better adapted to survive on raw than many other species of carnivores. They don't have multi-chambered stomachs or other specialized organs to help them digest plant matter like a cow or a moose. But brown bears have slightly elongated digestive tracts to help them better pull nutrition from plants, especially when we compare their digestive system to wolves or lynx and many other predators that live in the same habitats as brown bears. And if we made a list of all the foods that brown bears ate in any habitat, then the list might run into the hundreds. And Jen, I think that's true of black bears too. Their diet is another aspect of their lives that is both similar to and very different from brown bears.
Yeah, it's very similar to brown bears in that they are also omnivorous and generalists. They eat a lot of plants, a lot of berries. They'll dig for roots as well. Insects. They can range across many different environments. And maybe it's different in that they will climb trees to get food. Brown bears probably aren't doing that, but they're going to be eating a lot of berries, skunk cabbage, sedge. Everyone's always surprised to see bears eating grass. They're not used to that. They don't think of them as that. But new growth sedge has a lot of protein, so they'll eat those. And in our area, we also have an intertidal zone. So they're eating crabs and clams and barnacles, which they scrape off with their teeth off the rocks, which seems like it would hurt, but they enjoy them. And it seems to be like just a little bit of food, but it's enough that they'll spend hours scraping off barnacles off the rocks. And then, of course, salmon. But that's not everywhere. That's just on salmon streams.
And Alysa, in contrast to brown and black bears, polar bears, again, they're kind of their own deal. They're not going to be looking to forage on plants. Their diet is really maybe the most specialized among the three North American bears.
Yes, and I'm so glad we were talking about diet because everything to do with polar bears really comes down to diet. All these adaptations, where they live, what they do. Polar bears have, evolved to have the most carnivorous diet of all the bears. And really, it's not even meat. Some scientists like to kind of unofficially call them lipivores because what polar bears are really going for is seal blubber. They can eat over 100 pounds of blubber at one sitting. Their digestive system has evolved from brown bears and has multiple differences to better digest fat and use fat as energy. They are not as good at processing protein and carbohydrates compared to black and brown bears. So what we're watching in this is just the best illustration. We actually saw this live on the cams last year, the year before. So this is a polar bear at this time of year. There's a seal in that, well, it's the ocean. It's Hudson Bay there. And you can see the seal's kind of taunting the bear, but it's in open water. And this polar bear desperately wants it. It's hungry, but it doesn't have that element of surprise. It can't use the sea ice to sneak up on that seal. So the seal easily gets away. And this illustrates that polar bear really does need to use this platform of ice. That bear never did get that seal, but it was sure entertaining to watch. And it tried a couple times and it eventually laid down on the beach with its head on its paws and just watched for this seal. Anyway, they really do want to be eating blubber. They're very efficient at eating the fat that they eat. Most of it goes directly into their own body fat. And then that's what they live off. When they come back onto land, they'll live off their own body fat. So for polar bears, they really are blubber hunting ice bears, highly specialized. They're on the lookout for seals using that ice. And that for them is really the name of the game. They are much less maybe flexible than the other North American bear species. We will see that. I should say, and Mike, you've seen this. When we see them at this time of year on land, they are still bears, of course. So they are eating things they find. We do see them eating a bit of grass and seaweed if they get lucky enough to catch a vole, or maybe there is a stranded seal occasionally. They are eating what they can, but it is only that blubber that's truly getting them the calories and the amount of energy that they need to be this highly specialized carnivore out in the freezing cold Arctic.
Fat really is extraordinarily important to all bears in North America. And no matter how they're getting those calories, I mean, they're often doing it with the goal in mind to get fat. They're maybe not, contemplating it like we do, but their body feels that need to get fat. Because winter offers another opportunity for us to compare the lifestyles and adaptations of these different bears. It's winter significance shows us once again how similar and dissimilar these bears can be. For most every black and brown bear in North America, winter is a season of dormancy. It's a time to endure rather than thrive as an active animal. So living as a large-bodied omnivore, it can have its disadvantages. Again, if you're a black bear, you're a brown bear, and winter food is usually hard to come by, sometimes non-existent. So to survive, they must fuel their energetic needs, not by foraging in the winter, but by subsisting on stored energy. And they do this by entering a state of hibernation and surviving on body fat. And we'll discuss what winter means for polar bears soon. But for me, the bear's experience inside the den is just a fascinating part of their lives. Jen, hibernation, I think, as I understand it, is functionally equivalent for brown and black bears. And they're surviving winter by using some of the most remarkable adaptations of any mammal.
Yeah, hibernation in any animal is amazing, but in black and brown bears, it's truly incredible. The adaptations are so remarkable that scientists have taken to calling them super hibernators. That's because although their body temperature doesn't drop as low as other hibernators, it drops only like by 12 degrees, the bear's heart and respiratory rate drop dramatically. They average only 1 breath per minute and about 8 to 10 beats per minute in hibernation. And bears don't eat, drink, urinate, or defecate while in the den. They survive on their body fat alone. That's why we celebrate Fat Bear Week, because that's what they're going to use to survive throughout the hibernation. And so a bear metabolizes fat to maintain that body temperature that they have. Fat is also metabolized to produce water. And since they don't urinate, the bears recycle their waste. Their urea is converted into proteins that maintain a bear's muscle and organ tissues. And if humans tried to go that long without removing waste, we would die of toxicity poisoning. Also, fat metabolism causes the bear's cholesterol to skyrocket, but somehow they don't suffer the hardening of arteries like we would. And most amazingly, bears hardly lose any muscle mass despite lack of exercise, whereas we as humans, if we were bedridden, we would lose muscle and bone mass if we stayed in bed too long. Bears can even heal wounds while they're hibernating, even though they aren't getting any nutrients. It's really incredible.
It's truly a fascinating process that they're able to undergo, and I think there's a lot of potential applications for human health if we can ever figure out how brown and black bears are doing that. And then on top of all of that stuff, if you're a mother brown bear or a mother black bear, you're giving birth in midwinter. So like in January or early February, they're hibernating at that time. They're not eating, they're not drinking, but when they give birth, then they start to lactate too, to provide newborn cubs with milk. And after cubs are born, they suckle on mother's milk for several weeks in the den before the family emerges in the spring. Alysa, when we look at the denning behavior, that this is really another place where polar bears stand apart from brown and black bears, because in any given year, most polar bears do not enter a den. But there's one class of polar bear that is always going to utilize a den, and that's the pregnant females.
Right. Only pregnant females head into a den and that's where they are right now. So up in this area, we're not seeing any pregnant females. They should be down mostly in Wapas National Park, denning at the moment. The rest of the polar bears that come on land, they just kind of take it easy instead of actually hibernating. Actually hibernating would probably help them out. but they just like to get kind of lazy instead. But here's just some really lovely footage inside a polar bear den. So polar bear cubs are born. They're just like the size of a block of butter, just a pound or so. And polar bear moms have the fattiest milk that we find on land. So it's over 30% fat. It's like whipping cream. Those cubs grow incredibly quickly. And so this female, she will go, imagine a female around here, a Churchill polar bear female. She'll have come onto land in the summer. She'll be going into her den right now, overwintering, giving birth, nursing, hanging out with her cubs while they grow and get strong. And then she's not going to emerge from her den until roughly March, and then head out to the sea ice to go hunt seals around the time when the seals are pupping. So there's lots of good food to eat. But if you add that all up, polar bear moms in this region go up to 8 months without eating anything at all. So it's pretty incredible how long they can last on their own body fat.
Yeah, I can't fathom it. I mean, people tend to get hangry after a few hours without food, and then we have mother bears going months and months and months at a time, as much as 8 months, with in the case of some polar bears. So absolutely incredible. One of the interesting things about this whole process, though, too, is brown and black bears are not obligate hibernators. If they can find enough food, or at least a combination of milder weather and at least some food, then they can remain active year round. I don't think that's been documented in cat-mice brown bears, although biologists have documented winter active brown bears on nearby Kardiak Island. So the only North American bears, no matter the species, that must experience a period of like inactivity to going into a den are those pregnant females that need to give birth. So that's sort of one sort of shared history between all three of them. And Jen, I had a question for you. I've seen winter active black bears in southern parts of North America. Are there black and brown bears in the Tongass National Forest that remain active all year?
Not that I've heard of, but again, when you make a definitive claim, they end up making a liar out of you. So there are like random anecdotes of people seeing a bear in December or January, but there's no full populations of them not hibernating. Even around areas like a dump or something like that in Juneau, they still do hibernate, but it's something like, it may be a shorter amount of time, but it's not like in, say, Florida or Texas or Mexico, where it's only the pregnant females that are hibernating.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that information. The need of pregnant bears to become inactive, to give birth and nurse newborn cubs is one of the most consequential characteristics that all North American bears share. It's a huge energetic burden on mother to go so long without eating and raising cubs at the same time. Alysa, let's assume for polar bear moms that all goes well. She's fat when she goes into the den. She gives birth to healthy cubs. They grow fast on her milk. What happens afterward for the polar bear families? Like, how long are they staying together?
Overall, cubs will stay with their mom for up to about 2.5 years. That first year they're born, we call them cubs of the year. They're just little. They've got a lot to learn. Mom's going to head out to the sea ice with them, but usually not take them right out into the middle of the ice, kind of stick them maybe a little closer. Just be a little more careful. She's got these vulnerable cubs who can't really swim yet. Little cubs don't have the body fat they need to make these long, icy swims. So she's playing it safe. She's staying away from adult males. The following year, the cubs are called yearlings, and maybe they're a little more helpful. They're out with mom. Hopefully they can help her hunt a little bit. And then that second year, they're just with mom for a few months after they turn 2, hopefully being much more helpful then because they get weaned kind of that spring. And they will now be called subadults. And from the time they're about that 2.5 to 5 years old, they're these subadults, kind of the teenagers of the bears. At 5 years old, they're considered an adult. And mom will go right away and mate again. So female polar bears mate about every 3 years. The cubs have half that time with her, 2.5 years to learn all they can. And then the subadult time is, I think, probably a tough time for bears. We see the subadults kind of getting into some more trouble, making some poor decisions. They're not, they haven't figured things out yet. They're not fully grown. It's got to be a tough time, but they've learned a lot from mom. And we know polar bear mothers are absolutely incredible. She usually has 1 or 2 cubs at a time. We have seen triplets before. Definitely that happens. And just a fun fact, we know from genetics that occasionally polar bear moms have adopted a cub that's not their own. So that happens once in a while in the wild. We don't really know how or why, but we have it documented, which is pretty neat.
Oh yeah, that is fascinating. I don't think I remember hearing about that. And we've seen it in brown bears. We've seen adoption there, but in brown bears, it's extremely rare as well. And the family lives of brown bears too is really similar to polar bears. Brown bears keep their cubs 1 to 3 summers on average, although the average age of cubs at family breakup it varies between populations. And in Katmai, a mother brown bear typically keeps her cubs for 2 to 3 summers. Then the family will den together for the winter and then separate in the spring during the mating season. So from what I understand, Jen, the black bears, they have a much higher reproductive rate. Like they don't keep their cubs nearly as long as what we see usually in brown and black bears.
No, they're only keeping their cubs for usually 16 to 18 months. So the cub will spend the summer and the fall, and then the next spring, they usually get emancipated or kicked off. So they have a very short time to learn everything. So they're watching their mom forage, watching her fish, identifying the plants that she's eating. They'll even smell her breath after she's eating something to get that sensory experience to learn exactly which plants it was that she's eating. And a key first lesson for them is, because they go up into trees for safety so much, is when they emerge from the den, the mom will teach the cub to climb the tree at her request and then to come back down. So she gives like a little explosive breath, and that tells the cub to run up the tree, and then she'll call them back down. So she'll do that a few times a little bit after they emerge from the den, so that she knows that she can trust that they will go up a tree for safety. She sometimes just stashes them up a tree as well, just so that she can go down to fish. But when there is danger, this is also teaching them what they need to be looking out for, and when they should be climbing the tree for themselves as well. And so in contrast with mother brown bears who defend their cubs aggressively, black bears tend to send their kids up trees. And so they don't defend them as aggressively as brown bears. They still can be dangerous, and you never want to get between them. But that's their defense mechanism, because they evolutionary were raised with trees, and that's their defense mechanism.
And I'll note too that the family separation process seems to be similar between all 3 species. The trigger for family breakup is the return of a mother bear's estrus cycle. So she may become sort of intolerant of her cubs at this time, but quite often it's really the presence of a male bear that's attracted to the situation that tells the offspring, hey, it's time to move on. You know, he's looking for a mating opportunity, and the cubs are looking to stay out of harm's way. So he might not be aggressive towards the cubs, but his presence there, again, is enough for the cubs to get the message and begin their life of independence. And I always think of like a cub's life with mom as really this short apprenticeship. And I wonder if the final separation is a bit shocking for a young bear who relied on its mother so much for like guidance and food and protection. And you heard Alysa talk about how like that subadult stage can be just really difficult for polar bears. And I think that's true of all bears as well. And let's not forget that bears live in a world that's rapidly changing too. We do want to talk about how the environment's changing and how that might affect bears in different ways. We had a question that maybe leads us into this. Cold Nose on YouTube wrote in, and I think in reference to polar bears. So Alysa, I'll throw this question to you. In that environment, how can you possibly provide for 2 to 3 kids?
I ask that all the time when I see these moms out there with these little babies. I've seen a lot of polar bears in my time. I've been very fortunate, and I still marvel at even their existence, let alone being able to raise cubs. These mothers truly are incredible. This bear is so intelligent. We just see them always figuring things out, looking. They're so interested in new things. They are really incredible hunters. And luckily, seals pack a lot of calories. So we do know that, in regular year, about 50% of cubs won't make it, 50% will. We do see some better years, some worse years. This is pretty standard in the animal kingdom for many species. So they don't all make it, but enough do that, these populations some are doing well out there still. And these moms just keep on hunting and taking care of their babies. It truly is incredible. I can't imagine.
Yeah, the skill of mother bears, really their heroism in a sense. I mean, to provide for their offspring against all odds is truly incredible. And that's one of the things that sometimes I ponder again when we think about how like the earth is changing due to human activity. Brown and black bears, in my opinion, they seem to be overall as species, they're well positioned to endure change because they're omnivores. They can survive on many different types of foods. But climate change remains a threat to bears, especially where bears rely on salmon or other foods that can be negatively impacted by climate change. And bear foods vary in their availability and nutrition. Some foods are only available in specific seasons. Some bear populations are more reliant on specific foods than others. For example, the brown bears that gather at Brooks River in Katmai are there because the river provides them with easy access to salmon. Katmai hosts brown bears at some of the highest densities per square kilometer ever measured, in no small part because bears there have reliable access to food like salmon. And brown bears in the Brooks River area also have fared especially well in recent decades, since sockeye salmon runs in the Bristol Bay region of Alaska, where Brooks River is located, have been consistently large for about 40 years. So if you're a bear that's grown up from, to be my age, essentially from 1980 and onward, it's been pretty good for you in the Katmai region. Jen, I'm curious though about a different part of Alaska. Again, about the same latitude, but much to the farther east, directly off of the Pacific. Like brown bears in Katmai, the bears in Tongass National Forest and Ann Creek rely on salmon as an important food source. So, how have wild salmon runs in your area of the world fared in recent decades?
Well, the salmon runs at Ann Creek have held pretty steady in comparison to other regions, although the trend line does indicate like a downward slope, but not an extreme one. Alaska's salmon streams fare way better than the lower 48 because of dams and pollution, and Alaska's really good with its fisheries. However, of course, the increasing impacts of climate change can pose a significant risk with the warming oceans that can negatively affect salmon populations. And also the warmer air in the atmosphere can hold more moisture. And a rainforest, you're thinking of rain, but usually it's drizzle. And we will get more now intense rainfalls, which disrupt the flow of the creek. Like this year, we had a huge 2-day heavy rainfall, which blew out all the fishing holes and pushed all the salmon back out into the lagoon. After a few days, that kind of came back. But if we have more rainfall like that for a full summer, that would devastate the salmon run in a different way than people would think of. So that's why, not to plug the election, but that's why it's important to vote for people who prioritize climate change and climate action and environmental protections, because we do need to, it's all connected in many different ways.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There is a very consequential election coming up in less than a week's time in the United States. So yeah, think about that when you're casting your vote, please. It does make a difference. And there's a follow-up question to what you were saying, Jen, about salmon. I think we also got an audience question that's sort of related to this. So hopefully we'll get to answer this person's question as we're talking about this. This person was wondering, how is climate change affecting these different types of bears? And we're going to get to polar bears in just a moment. I want to know specifically though, Jen, about pink salmon. They're unique among Pacific salmon because they have a fixed 2-year lifespan. And in Southeast Alaska, they return to spawn in larger numbers, I think in even number years, if I read correctly. So how do bears adjust to maybe a relative lack of salmon in odd number years? And can this give us any clues about how they would adapt to maybe smaller runs of salmon in the future if ocean conditions become less habitable to salmon, like through climate change?
Well, luckily at in Annan, we actually have two separate runs. So we have both
Okay.
odd and even years. So they are genetically distinct, but we don't see the huge drops that some creeks have when they only have the one run. But we have had bad years, and you'll see when there's not that kind of abundance, some of the changes that will happen. You won't see the bears high grading as much, which means if they're catching a lot of fish, they won't eat the whole fish. They're going to go for the brains, the belly, the roe, and then they discard the rest of the fish. And that, like this picture in there, you can see a lot of discarded fish, and that leaves a lot of extra discarded fish for other bears, smaller bears. And so you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't get those bears. Some bears don't fish at all. All they do is scavenge. And so those bears would be left out if there's not that abundance. Also, I think the bears become maybe hangry. They get more competitive. They don't like other bears in their space, whereas usually when there's an abundance, they'll be fishing right next to other bears with no issue. So if you're having that more competitive and confrontational, then you'll be having bears that can't go down and fish if they're subordinate or if they're the females, which then is going to affect cascading down. And also just for the forest, when you have that abundance of fish, forests are healthier when they're on salmon streams with bears because the nitrogen that they're adding to the soil. So if you don't have that excess of nitrogen, that would affect the forest. But when it's just a temporary drop in fish abundance, Annan does have other food resources. So you'll see the bears more concentrated on berries or in the intertidal areas, sedge. But of course, all of those food sources can also be affected by climate change. So that underscores the urgent need to address climate change and protect these areas.
Absolutely. And that's especially important for polar bears, Alysa. They're the species that is most sensitive to climate change. And their situation is maybe critical in many ways because they are so specialized for living and foraging on sea ice.
Yeah, as our air and our waters are getting warmer, of course, ice doesn't like getting warmer. So we are losing sea ice in parts of the Arctic already. And where we are losing Arctic sea ice, we have seen changes in the polar bear population. So there are 20 polar bear populations across the Arctic. And we know where we have good data, particularly here in Western Hudson Bay. When we start to lose Arctic sea ice, polar bears consume fewer calories over time. This leads to smaller bears and smaller populations. And for example, here, there used to be about 1,200 polar bears in this region. Now there's just over 600. It's not that we've seen a bunch of polar bears starving to death at all. It's mostly just pressure on these moms and cubs. It's harder for moms to get pregnant. Sorry for all the rocking. It's very windy. To give birth to and then raise these cubs up. So climate change is having a lot of pressure on polar bears. And like we've talked about, they're so specialized. It's not that they can just move to another habitat. They need to be out there on the ice. And more so, as the ice starts breaking up and gets thinner, it's moving more. So polar bears are having to swim more. They're having to walk more on a sort of treadmill effect. Their prey is being impacted. There's more humans across the Arctic they're running into. There's more shipping and the potential of an oil spill. So these climate change impacts are really at the forefront, and it is the number one threat to the species. So we are working together as a global community, and amongst our colleagues, collaborators, to try to protect Arctic sea ice, because it's not only, of course, just about the polar bears, well, all these other bears, but Arctic sea ice is good for the whole planet. It helps keep all of us cool. It helps regulate all of our climates, no matter where you live. So what's good for the polar bears is good for us and good for all the North American bears and other bears as well. So it is important that we work together to get on the right track and vote for the right people that care about good policies for ourselves and for the bears.
Right. We have an amazing opportunity to address it. And the more we drag it out, the harder it's going to be. So let's get to it sooner rather than later. And we covered a lot of ground during our program today. And there's more that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about bear cultures and how we're seeing different bear cultures at our respective locations. I don't think we have much time for that. So I'm going to get to maybe the final questions that I had for everybody. And I know there was audience questions that came in too that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. But I do appreciate everyone's questions that they happen to write in. I want to know from my co-host here how they would describe the bear species that they study and know so well in just a few words. So Alysa, I'll go back to you right now. So again, thinking about polar bears, maybe in general, or maybe the polar bears just in Western Hudson Bay, how would you describe those bears in just a few words?
Okay, keep it short. Specialized, vulnerable, blubber hunting ice bears. Keep it quick.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe them. Jen, what about you? Thinking about, even maybe your brown bears in your area, but especially those black bears in the camps.
I would say they're both very intelligent, obviously very cute. They're surprisingly funny and very tolerant in Annan.
And for me, I see brown bears, like in Katmai National Park, as intelligent, strong, adaptable, and individualistic. And that's one of the things that really, watching bears at Katmai, opened my eyes up to the lives of individual animals and how special of an experience that can be, what those individuals can tell us about life and survival as a wild animal. So that, I think, is a really special thing about those animals. And then finally, what's next for the bears in your area? Jennifer, I'll go back to you. The salmon run at Annan Creek is over. So what are the bears up to right now?
Right now, they're probably finding a den to sleep in if they can. They're still around looking for remnants, eating whatever they can find, and then they'll be heading into the den. Usually black bears will just go under logs or in hollow cavities. Sometimes they excavate, but usually that's more of a brown bear trait.
And it's a similar story for the bears in Katmai right now too. Their preparation for hibernation, that is the name of the game. They're on the other, so the salmon runs are essentially over in Katmai right now, and there's little opportunity for a bear in the Brooks River area to find more food. So they'll be moving to their denning sites as their bodies transition into this hibernation physiology for winter. And we suspect that most bears in Katmai enter their dens in November. So that's coming up, of course, just in a few days and throughout the entirety of the month. Have some bears maybe going into their dens in early November, some bears going into their dens in late November, maybe some of the big males not entering their dens until November. And then finally, Alysa, polar bears in Western Hudson Bay, again, they're specialized. They're in a whole different situation. Seems like they can't wait to get it back out onto the frozen ocean.
Exactly. Yeah. And I apologize. I'm looking at my window a bit, but we've had 2 bears just come in. So if anyone's keeping an eye on the Tundra Buggy cam, check it out. They're just outside here. These polar bears, they're waiting for the ice to come back. So it should be freezing up in the next 2 to 6 weeks. Of course, we'll be online telling you all about it. And as soon as the ice is here, those bears are out. They're going to hunt as many seals as they can. The biggest feeding season for them is in the spring. That's when they're going to eat the most, but they'll sure will be happy to get out on the ice now. Hopefully we'll see some of these pregnant females emerge in March as well. And until then, we'll be here, watching on the polar bear cams and answering questions. And just a quick plug for Polar Bear Week. We are celebrating Polar Bear Week. We are talking largely about coexistence, people and polar bears living together, how to keep both safe. So check out some of our resources for that. And then next week, we'll be focusing on moms and cubs. So lots of fun stuff coming up for Polar Bears International and polar bears.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, definitely. Bears, they're driven by a profound hunger. They build body fat to fuel their survival during times of prolonged famine. No matter if that's winter, or if you're a brown or a black bear, or summer, if you're a polar bear, you need fat to survive the lean times. That body fat also provides female bears with the energy to feed their cubs when no other foods are available. North America's bears use specialized adaptations to survive in different ecosystems. Each bear population is unique in its own way. The populations raise questions about their future in an era of human-driven climate change. So let's work to ensure that bears have a place on an increasingly warming and crowded planet. Bears are amazing animals that are worth sharing our world with. And I want to thank my 2 co-hosts for this program today. First, we had Jennifer Kardiak, the manager at the Yan'an Wildlife Observatory in Tongass National Forest. And then my other co-host today was Alysa McCall, who's the Director of Conservation Outreach and a staff scientist at Polar Bears International. And my name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. Have a great day, everybody. Until we talk to you again, never stop learning.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.